Well, good afternoon and welcome back to the Business Transformation World Summit. This is our second on-site special edition of Transformation Talks. I'm here this time with Dom Skerritt, partner at McKinsey, who of course have been leading our Chief Transformation Officer Boardroom today. Dom, welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure.
And I have to say that in fairness to you, you've just literally about 2.5 seconds ago stepped away from running the boardroom. So we wanted to keep it fresh, but possibly this is a bit too fresh. So you've had a long day already, so we'll keep it short. But the idea today is to just provide some reflections on what you heard in that room. Just try and pull it together in a nice, neat bow so we can release post-event once the dust has settled. How's that sound?
That sounds great. There was a lot of great discussion in that room, so we'll do our best to pull it together into a nice, neat bow, but there's going to be a lot to cover.
Well, we're two professionals, aren't we? So I'm sure we'll manage fine. Let's start with an easy softball. What stood out the most to you from the conversations today? What's your big takeaway?
For me, I think two things stood out the most. The first was how the importance of transformation as a practice is probably greater now than it ever has been. In this moment of uncertainty and change that the whole world is going through, the demands for transformation are only increasing. That's number one. And I think the second thing that stood out for me is the change that we're all experiencing, particularly as a result of agentic artificial intelligence, is just phenomenal. And today was a great opportunity to learn from each other as we all try and figure this out together. Because quite frankly, I think right now, nobody knows what the future holds, let alone what 2026 holds.
Yeah, and I do think it's nice to be around a group of people who by and large are okay with that uncertainty. I mean, one of the things I always find myself talking about is just how comfortable transformation leaders are with the fact that nothing is certain. So that's become a bit of a superpower, right? If you're a CEO looking out around the board, then it's the transformation officer you want in the ring, in the fight for you at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. I overwhelmingly got the sense that I was in a room full of practitioners who are not only comfortable with uncertainty, but quite frankly, thrive in an environment of chaos. To them, chaos is opportunity, and it's also something they're pretty skilled at bringing order to help others capture the opportunity from those moments of transformational change.
For sure. So there were lots of conversations today, but the panels that we had kind of 4 key set piece panels, right, which addressed 4 separate themes. So I'm going to take each of those in turn, ask you for a couple of thoughts, what you feel came out of that particular discussion over the course of the day. So the first was, we really wanted to start with why, as all good transformation leaders do, and talk about the challenge, the opportunity of building purpose-led transformation. How do you feel, based on discussions today and what you thought coming in, the purpose of transformation as a discipline has changed in an agentic age?
Yeah, I think my takeaway from today is that each transformation needs to have its own unique purpose, and that purpose needs to be communicated and understood clearly throughout the organization. Leaders need to start with communicating their why for the transformation, but importantly, they also need to help others in the organization understand their individual whys. My why may be very different to your why, but the role of the leader is to help us identify that, articulate that, and channel it to help enhance our energies towards a transformation. That was absolutely essential. And I think in some of the research that we've done recently in McKinsey, we've found that in the most successful transformations, they're able to articulate a purpose that goes beyond the bottom line. What is the greater good that is served by this effort? Yeah. And I think that's what really taps into employees' energies.
Yeah, for sure. And let's just talk about that a little bit, because it's like you were saying in your answer to the previous question, that's bread and butter for transformation leaders. But how it's always been a responsibility, I guess, but what is the responsibility today of transformation to promote uncertainty tolerance across the wider cross-functional business? How are you seeing them exercising that responsibility effectively?
Yeah, great question. I think we heard from the transformation executives today how the important role they play in building that uncertainty tolerance, but doing it through establishing credibility, establishing trust. And so that comes from delivering, which helps others feel confidence that there's a path through this uncertainty, that we are doing the things that we say we would do, even in chaotic environments. But also a real point around resilience. not everything we say we'll do is going to work out. There will be bumps in the road, and I think good transformation executives have a really critical role in charting the recovery path from those bumps. And how do we continue to head towards the outcome, even if the path to get us there is somewhat different than the path we initially envisaged?
And just a broader question is, we've heard quite a lot, actually across the whole conference, but I heard it in the boardroom too, about moving beyond a process approach and thinking about a journey-led vision, or starting with skills, or starting with the human. Lots of different approaches to thinking about organizational structure, or more specifically, I guess, the approach to transformation. How do you feel about that shift? Because of course, most transformation leaders today have a strong pedigree in process, right? That's how they probably came through and evolved. So how do you make that switch in practice, do you think?
Yeah, I think process has become table stakes. It is absolutely necessary, but not sufficient. And if you're claiming to be a transformation leader and you haven't got a robust process, a methodology that is reliable and predictable in getting towards outcomes, then you don't really have a seat at the table. But if you truly want to excel in this field, you've got to move well beyond process to be able to build the skills in your organization, build the capabilities to make that change sustainable, to tap into motivations and articulate a broader purpose, a greater why. And you've also got to be able to influence stakeholders throughout the organization. So yes, process is going to remain important, it's critical, it's essential, but it's not enough.
Yep, understood. So with skill and aplomb, such as we've moved seamlessly into the second theme, which was about building that future-ready organization, capabilities that scale, hence this debate around process. Do you maybe just want to make a little comment on Rajesh, your colleague's presentation? He spoke about unlocking your operating model, and that was a really great foundation for some debate. So just share a little bit with us what his key message was and why you think that's relevant to this piece around scalable capability for the future org.
Yeah, I think the thing that really stood out from Rajesh's discussion was just making sense of what does operating model transformation mean? I mean, prior to today's session, everyone I've spoken to, if you asked them what does operating model transformation mean, would have given me a different answer. I think the thinking that Rajesh and other colleagues have done to really bring clarity to that issue is outstanding. And funnily enough, I say bring clarity. I mean, having clarity is one of those key elements of an operating model transformation. Being able to move at speed, being able to ensure organizational commitment, and having the skills necessary to deliver on that. I think they're the core tenets of operating model transformation, which are now becoming much clearer. And I think people walked away today with having a useful framework to be able to navigate what hitherto has been such an amorphous and painful problem to try and work through.
And there were two, on the topic of organizational structure, two really interesting debates that I picked up. There was the diamond versus triangle debate and what's going to happen to the entry-level worker in the future enterprise, and it was really nice to hear such seasoned leaders so focused on that challenge and getting that challenge right. There was also a really big debate about whether the traditional functions that have defined businesses are going to even be relevant moving forward. So what's your kind of personal take on what the structure of the future enterprise might look like? What opportunities are there to start with a blank sheet of paper and do things completely differently if we're not restricted by those established views?
I think those two debates were the highlights of the day for me.
I agree.
And on that first topic of diamond versus triangle, and if we think of traditional organizations as being this pyramidal structure where you've got a broad base and it funnels up to a narrower set of leaders and eventually up to a CEO. Versus a future organization where maybe large parts at the bottom of that triangle are replaced by agentic systems. How do you create the talent pipeline that apprentices those mid-level leaders who you will need in the diamond part of the shape? That to me I thought was a fantastic discussion, not just at the individual company level, like how do you think about your talent pipeline, but that even has societal implications. What happens for those roles that no longer exist? That's something that I think I need to walk away and ponder for quite some time, not just as a transformation practitioner, not just as a professional, but even as a parent.
Yeah.
Like, what are my kids going to do 20 years from now?
Yep.
And so just a fascinating, thought-provoking conversation. I felt really privileged to be in the room with so many smart, seasoned people to think deeply and debate that topic.
Yeah, I think I said this to someone earlier, sort of dangerously close to the existential, right? And it's really, really not hard to get there, which again, scary thoughts, and for a lot of people, and the ability of the transformation leader to be calm is quite inspirational in that context, I think, right? So let's move on again, and actually, just before we do, I'm reminded of the panel where there was a discussion about AI for AI's sake, which is the theme that we're moving to, and the discussion that actually your agent of the future will need an annual appraisal in exactly the same way that the human operator does now, and that's kind of like a mind-blowing concept, right?
Yeah, I thought that was amazing, and in one way it makes total sense. Like, any system, you should always be looking for continuous improvement in that system. You shouldn't accept the status quo. But on the other side, it sounded a little bit like a self-licking ice cream. Like, if I'm creating busy work for myself to give my robots feedback, what is going on here?
Yeah.
But really a fascinating conversation. And you used the word like existential, and I found that we were blessed to be with a bunch of very practical yet intelligent thinkers. But some of these challenges that we're wrestling with today really do move into the philosophical.
Yeah.
But to be able to have that conversation with such practical folk, made it a much richer discussion than I think I would have otherwise had.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see how it's not about artificial intelligence solely, this conversation, but I guess we'll see how AGI goes, right? Because maybe there's an agent out there that can help us answer these questions.
Hey, and maybe that agent can write those appraisals for me.
Maybe.
I think that's what I need to do. I need to write an agent that can do my performance appraisals on my agents.
Yeah,
right?
Ideally, yeah, but not with such skill that they can conduct this interview in the way that we're doing, because I think it's important.
Well, then we become the piece of the diamond.
I want to think about that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the No AI for AI's Sake panel. That's one of my favorites, because I love when you talk to transformation leaders and you have the conversation about AI and the need to roll it out, and they talk about the pressure from the CEO to buy AI and to be a shining example of that within whichever industry or organization they sit in. And they give the same answer every time, which is, yeah, but what problem are we trying to solve? Because I always think of them as professional problem solvers. It's what makes them so cool, right? You put them down in any environment and they go and solve the problem that you give them. So I think that's such interesting context for that debate. That was part of a broader discussion around what was called human-centric AI transformation. And I just want to ask what your own definition of human-centric actually is, because I think if you looked at it binary, you could say human-centric was anti-technology, and I wouldn't say Chief Transformation Officers are anti-technology at all. They're just very studied in how they want it to be applied and to what. So what's your view on what human-centric actually means?
Yeah, I think you said the good Chief Transformation Officers will ask, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? But then also, what is the value that solving that problem will bring to humans?
Yep.
To our customers, to our employees. Like, at the end of the day, it is in service of something, or better said, in service of someone. Who are those people that are gaining benefit from this application of AI? Because otherwise we go back to this self-licking ice cream thing, where it's the AI in service of the AI. It's an infinite loop. It doesn't get us anywhere useful.
This is dangerously existential, actually, considering the day that you've just had. And we'll see. Let's see if this question gets cut to B-roll afterwards. But it makes me think, we've just had a conversation about the agent being a sort of peer component of the workforce moving forward. So surely in that context, the definition of value changes quite significantly as well, because it is human value, but there's also an agent to think about. So how do we get our heads around that topic?
Well, I thought we had a great discussion on this and the importance of the new skills that are going to be required for managers in the future.
Yeah.
They're going to need to be able to manage agentic systems,
yep,
as well as humans,
yep,
and in some cases managing them side by side. So the skills that the manager needs to have is not just like how to lead people or how to have the content expertise, how to understand the agentic systems,
yep,
but I think really importantly how to step back out of all of that and have a critical perspective on the output that you're getting, both from the people and the agents, to be able to really challenge the thinking and inject new thinking and new creativity in a way that we're not going to get just from having an agentic system.
And let's quickly talk about that, because there was still, I guess it's a little bit of an echo chamber because everybody in that room was a transformation leader, but there was I guess you could call it a concern that we should protect core transformation principles when applying and scaling AI. Like, there are fundamentals. So what would your advice be to those leaders on how they protect those core principles, given the rush, the hype, the corporate pressure to roll and scale AI within their businesses?
Yeah, I think one really important value add that transformation executives can make is really focusing on how is this thing driving value, but also I use language, protecting the downside, like making sure we understand, okay, what are the costs associated with doing this thing in the broadest sense of that word, and then is that net the right value for the business. And I think transformation leaders are particularly good at forcing those challenging conversations and make sure people think critically before just pursuing the next shiny object, regardless of where that's taking us to.
Yeah. So we've made, you'll be pleased to know, we've reached the final theme, so you're almost off the hook. Yeah, I know, I'm a tough interviewer, but we're almost done. So that final panel this afternoon, which I thought was brilliant, was about sustainable transformation and sort of keep maintaining the momentum for the long term, I guess you could say. But before we get into that topic, I think we need to talk about an elephant in the room, or maybe I should have said a fish in the tank, because there's a wave fish right now. But current era execution, there was a discussion on that last panel about how you can look beyond the day-to-day. How do transformation officers do that? Because they're all being tasked with this huge topic of thinking about the reinvention of the business as we know it, but they're also all day-to-day leading on projects that nobody wants to let go right now. So they've got that day-to-day mandate, which is already really, really tough. So how can we look beyond current era execution? What did you take from the last panel in terms of advice nuggets on that one?
Well, I took away from that a huge role of the transformation executive is, yes, you're right, making sure that the day-to-day is happening, but also setting up an infrastructure, an ecosystem that encourages the continuous injection of new ideas that are addressing a longer horizon. Yeah. I often talk to transformation executives who are new in their role, and they're thinking, okay, like, is this a 2-year thing? Is this a 3-year thing? What does the future look like for me here? And my response to that is, like, your role will continue to be relevant as long as there are new ideas that have not yet been executed. Yeah. So a large part of what keeps your role relevant and important and adding value to the business is that continuous inflow of new ideas. And those new ideas are going to be executed further out in the future on longer and longer timelines. So I think it's incumbent, it's a survival imperative for the transformation executive to continue to inject new ideas and look out to longer timelines.
Yeah, and just to double down on that and play again on a theme that we've talked about through this, I won't say from who, because we'll keep it anonymous, but there was an example given in that final panel about a hugely ambitious approach to organizational redesign, right, where they basically, the whole business was torn up and thought about in a completely different way. Now, arguably there is a requirement for that level of ambition within transformation projects, but I guess by their very nature that type of ambition is hard to sustain because it requires a lot of people to put a lot of energy into something quite difficult and challenging to achieve. So how do you see, or what advice do you give to your clients around balancing that need for big vision and fresh approach to keeping things manageable, bite-sized, transmissible through the wider organization day to day so it doesn't become untenable?
Well, I think it's critical to have that big vision and to be articulated early on in the process so people have that light on the hill, that beacon, what are we moving towards? But from there, the Chief Transformation Officer has a critical role to break that big vision down into things that are executable and that we can know, have we done this thing or not, and let's move step by step by step. And I think it's important to have some constancy in that light on the hill, and maybe when you get to the top of that hill, then it's time to reset and look to the next hill. Behind every mountain there's a higher mountain, but it helps if we're continuing to head in that direction rather than changing direction every time. So I think that's a little bit of the role that the Chief Transformation Officer plays in concert with the rest of the executive team and the CEO in charting the destination and revisiting that from time to time, but not from day to day.
So just to close, just tell us a little bit about why this partnership is so important to the McKinsey transformation practice. You have the role as the knowledge partner of the event, and we have worked hand in glove to co-create the content for pretty much 12 months, and I'm really proud of that partnership, as you know. So just tell us a little bit about that process and what it's meant to your practice.
Well, firstly, the partnership and today in particular have been fun, but
Key.
Yeah. Secondly, it's a premier convening of transformation executives in North America. For us, it's a real privilege to be the exclusive knowledge partner, to be able to craft the agenda. And I say that because that means we get to have really rich discussions on topics that we find fascinating and valuable and interesting, and we hope participants do as well. And I think what we saw today is, it was very much engaging, energetic conversations. And for me personally, the ability to be able to have some of the best brains in this area in one room together for a day, working through some of the toughest problems that our practice faces, and particularly at this moment of increasing change, to be able to learn from the best transformation practitioners about how they're navigating these crazy times. That was a real privilege, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity.
So a long day, a busy day, an insightful day, but most importantly a fun day. Dom, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you for joining us, and from Miami, bye-bye.